Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today we're diving into historical mystery of absolutely epic proportions. I want you to just imagine a legend so powerful, a figure so incredibly monumental, that he supposedly single-handedly split an entire global religion right down the middle. We are talking about the sheer scale of the legend of Abd Allah ibn Saba. According to centuries of inherited narrative, this is the guy's personal behind-the-scenes machinations literally birthed the sectarian divisions of early Islam. But as we're going to see today, the story we've been handed might just be the most successful scapegoating campaign in human history.
So here's the basic narrative we're working with. In the historical sources, Ibn Saba is described as a Yemenite Jew who feigned conversion to Islam way back in the 1st century of the religion. And his supposed goal? To totally corrupt it from the inside out. The sources basically paint him as the ultimate mastermind of sectarianism. They say he fomented the first civil war, that he was the very first person to publicly proclaim the exclusive right of Ali to lead the community, and the very first to introduce these extreme religious doctrines. He's presented as the grand architect of all heterodoxy.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Legend of Ibn Saba. Early Islamic heresiographers, the scholars whose job it was to catalog early sects, they didn't just give Ibn Saba a minor background role. No. They credited him with virtually every single idea the later Orthodox centers wanted to outlaw. This is what we call the ghulat dossier, with ghulat meaning religious exaggeration or extremism. It just shows the massive weight placed on this one guy's shoulders. They claim he introduced the concept of legacyship, meaning Ali was the divinely appointed successor to Muhammad. They say he introduced the repudiation of the first 3 caliphs. They even credit him with the doctrine that Ali didn't actually die, but ascended to the clouds and would eventually return. And in the absolutely most lurid accounts, they say he was the first to literally call Ali a god. It's an incredibly rapid-fire, conveniently comprehensive rap sheet for just one guy, isn't it?
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of a Scapegoat. When you're faced with a supervillain resume like that, the immediate temptation is to just stop and ask, wait, did this man actually exist? And hey, it's a totally fair question. For a century, modern scholars have fought bitterly over this exact thing. You've got historians like Israel Friedlander, who fully believed he was a real Jewish convert who transplanted messianic ideas into Islam. And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, scholars like Taha Hussein and Mortada al-Askari argued he was a total fabrication, a phantom basically, invented by a single unreliable narrator. It's a debate that is literally still raging today.
But for our purposes in this explainer, that is entirely the wrong question. We are going to completely bracket the question of whether he historically existed or not. Why? Because the persistence, the structure, and the absolute utility of this narrative, it's fascinating, whether he walked the earth or not. The real question, the one that cracks this whole case wide open, is what cultural work was this figure made to perform? Why did Ibn Saba need to be invented in the first place?
To really understand that, we have to look at him not as a historical human being, but as a portable narrative module. Think of it like a piece of ideological software. Look, if a religious tradition believes it is 100% pure at its source, how on earth does it explain its own messy internal divisions later on? It definitely can't admit the flaws came from inside the house. So it plugs in this template, the foreign convert. It explains away internal fracturing as external contamination, basically an alien disguised as a believer sneaking in to ruin everything.
And get this, we actually have a smoking gun. It comes from the main historical source who gives us the political biography of Ibn Saba, an 8th century historian named Saif ibn Umar. Researchers found another text by this exact same author where he explains how ancient Christianity was corrupted by a Jewish infiltrator named King Paul. Saif explicitly writes, "The lesson of Paul in this community is the lesson of Ibn Saba." He is using the exact same storytelling template, the corrupting Jewish convert, to explain the fracturing of 2 completely different religions. Wow.
Which brings us to Section 3, Weaponizing a Jewish Identity. So you might be wondering, why was it absolutely essential to this narrative that Ibn Saba be a Jewish convert? Why not a Byzantine Christian or, a Persian Zoroastrian? Well, the scholar Stephen Wasserstrom explains that under early Islam, Jewish and Muslim communities defined themselves through and against one another. It was a symbiotic interdefinition. Because they share Abrahamic roots, Shiite thinkers often naturally drew on Judaic paradigms to explain their own theology. And in turn, Sunni polemicists seized on those similarities to brand Shiism as a Jewish intrusion. So the crucial point here is how these shared typologies were basically weaponized. Take the concept of a legatee or divine successor, for example. The narrative claims Ibn Saba, as a Jew, knew Joshua was the legatee of Moses and just copy-pasted that onto Islam by calling Ali the legatee of Muhammad. This operates as what we call a genetic argument, and it's incredibly economical. By claiming a doctrine has a Jewish pedigree, polemicists didn't even have to bother debating the theology itself. They simply invalidated the Shii doctrine by claiming it came from a doubly foreign, tainted source. Bam, argument over.
All right, Section 4, Policing the Inner Circle.
Now here is the massive plot twist in our investigation. Up until now, you might think this Ibn Saba character was just a weapon used by Sunni scholars to attack Shiism, right? Actually, not at all. Mainstream Shiite scholars took this exact same invented bogeyman and used him for their own purposes. To get this, we first need to understand the term ghulat, which translates to exaggerators. This was an external label of exclusion. See, early Shiism had a lot of really esoteric, mystical currents. But as a mainstream, rationalizing 12er Shiite orthodoxy began to emerge, they really wanted to distance themselves from those esoteric groups. They needed to marginalize them to gain mainstream respectability.
And if you look at how this played out, the symmetry is just perfect. It's a double-edged sword. Sunni polemicists used Ibn Saba to say, hey, Shiism is corrupted by a Jewish convert. Meanwhile, mainstream Shia orthodoxy used the exact same guy to say, no, our core tradition is pure, but those extremist esoteric fringes we don't like. Yeah, they were corrupted by this Jewish convert. It was perfectly fitted to the totally contradictory needs of opposing parties.
In fact, in the Shii biographical texts, known as the Rijal literature, they actually depict their own holy imams vividly cursing Ibn Saba. By placing a curse in the mouths of the imams against the man who supposedly called them gods, the mainstream scholars were drawing a really firm, authoritative line. They were proving that acceptable veneration of the imams was totally different from illicit deification. Ibn Saba was the ultimate foil they desperately needed to prove their own moderation. Section 5. The Invention of Orthodoxy.
This leads us to the overarching theme of our entire explainer today, how religious orthodoxy is actually constructed over time. Because whether we're talking about Sunni or Shii frameworks, the invention of Ibn Saba follows a highly logical three-step formula. Step 1. A community claims an unbroken, totally pure origin. Step 2. As the community naturally grows, it inevitably experiences messy internal division, political strife, and theological disagreement. Step 3. To protect that myth of purity from Step 1, the community has to externalize the conflict from Step 2. They have to blame an external subverter.
The scholar Yosef Van Es points out that early Islam didn't have a central church to sit down and dictate what was heresy and what was orthodox. Orthodoxy was entirely in the eye of the heresiographer. So to build a pure orthodox center retrospectively, they actually had to invent a first heretic. To narrate the first heretic is to define the safe community by negation. Ibn Saba is that keystone. He is the ultimate first heretic, fashioned out of thin air, so the center could define itself against him.
So, we've seen how the allegation of a Jewish convert functioned as this absolutely brilliant, if highly destructive, piece of polemical software. It externalized conflict, it totally avoided deep theological debate, and it drew hard, uncompromising communal lines. Which leaves us with this final thought for today. If the construction of scapegoats is a universal tool for communities trying to hide their own internal fractures, who are the foreign subverters we are inventing today to explain away our own divisions? Think about it. Keep an eye out, because that portable narrative module, it's always looking for a new host.